all overheated.
You've been working too hard, huh?
Yeah, it's...
Well, you know where the thermostat is.
Yeah,
Crank
I
it
know.
down a little bit, get a little air moving.
As soon as I sit down, I think I'm going to be fine. Yeah, what you got?
Well, we're showing. You want me to tweak this down one? We'll get a little air moving here.
All right. Thank you.
We'll get a little air moving.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. I've been looking forward to this for a while. You showed me some poster boards and pictures and stuff, and stuff I'd never known about.
Yeah.
You know, I never knew that you worked on jets, for example. I didn't know all the different places where you'd been. So why don't we start at the beginning, and why don't you tell me how in the world did you want to, what made you want to go into the military?
Okay, have you got the cameras and everything rolling now?
Everything's going.
I should start right now?
Sure.
Well, it's like this. We both know that the Korean War started in June of 1950. I was 17 years old at the time. I was well below the draft age, and back in those days, everybody got drafted if you were even partially physically fit. So anyway, come the July, I turned 18 years old. So we all decided that, well, rather than getting drafted and going into the Army and sent off to Korea where you could very easily get killed in a trench over there, why don't we enlist in the Air Force? They don't get hurt like that bad. So anyway, we all went down to Ottawa. We lived in Salmonaught then, so Ottawa was our draft area. So we went down there, we did the paperwork, and they said, or some of the paperwork, and they said, well, you have to have a birth certificate, you know. So anyway, my mother and myself, I did not have a birth certificate. I was born on a farm down in Bureau, Illinois, in 1932, and why I do not have a birth certificate, I don't know, unless possibly Mom and Dad didn't pay the bill, I don't know. But we went down to that courthouse in Princeton, and they went through their ancient files and they found me in there, so they gave me what they called a delayed certificate of birth. So I came back up here, and Jerry Kaufman, the oldest of the group, he received his draft notice. So he said, I better not go to the Air Force because they'll get me for fraudulent enlistment. So he said, okay, so he was out of the picture. So that was Alan Kaufman, Leroy and Ralph Cook, and myself left. Well, Leroy and Ralph Cook were in the same boat that I was. They didn't have birth certificates either, and they were born and raised somewhere down around Pana, Illinois, down around Decatur, down in that area. So they couldn't come up with birth certificates. So now that left just Alan and myself. So talking to our recruiter down in Ottawa, they put us on a train and sent us off into Chicago to the main recruiting station or the enlistment station or whatever, the military, where they took you in the military. So Alan and I went in there and we did all the paperwork and did the physical part. Correction, shouldn't say the physical part. We did the paperwork. Then it came time to raise your right hand. You're going to go into the Air Force and you're going to do all these good things for our country and blah, blah, blah. You are now part of the Air Force. Well, I turn around and looking all over the place. Where's Alan? I mean, can't find Alan. No, I'm by myself. And next thing I know, I'm on a train head. And by this time it's dark. We're heading off towards Texas to go to the first base that I was ever on. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but Alan did not pass his physical. So Alan turned around and came home. So that meant out of the 5 of us that were going to go to the Air Force, I made it. Nobody else did. But anyway, even as a child, I was always aviation oriented. There was pictures of me standing on the sidewalk out in front of our house in Salmonok, and what have I got? I got a pair of wings. You know, I like airplanes. So anyway, that's why we decided to go to the Air Force, because the draft was going to get us eventually, you know. So if we don't enlist, we don't get to choose which branch of the service we go to.
Right.
So at least I wound up getting into the Air Force. Never spent a night in my whole life away from home, and was I ever one homesick little boy, I'll tell you. So I got down to San Antonio, Texas, the Lackland Air Force Base, and you got rid of that homesick bit right away, because they got busy with you, teaching you how to march and how to do all these military things, and of course at that time, with the millions of other people like myself that would rather enlist in the Air Force than get drafted, that base was crowded, and they had no barracks for us. So they had set up a tent city, and we had cots, not beds, but cots. But now this was in January, probably about January 3rd or 4th, and it's cold down there, you know, so they give us all about 4 blankets, and they said put 3 of them below you and 1 on top of you, you know, and keep you warm. So, okay. So anyway, we learned right away that when that drill sergeant came down the street, now we were in flight, what they call Flight 130. I don't know how many people were in that flight at the time. He come walking down the road and he said, Flight 130 on the road, and boy, you better hit it, you know, and they taught you how to land, to form up in a formation type thing out there, you know, arms length apart and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that was our introduction to the basic training. So then they took us, like I said, they did all the little basic things, how to march, how to do reverse step and oblique, left and oblique right, and all of this marching stuff, you know. And we went out to the firing range, and everybody fired off about a dozen 30 caliber shells. And so that was our time at the firing range. And then we had a little 5-mile hike. Well, back in those days, my God, I'm 18 years old, 5 miles is like walking off your, you know, one of the easiest things in the world. But some of the guys probably out of the city that never walked more than a block at a time, they knew they had walked 5 miles. So anyway, finally they decided, well, we're going to complete your basic training at another base because we're too crowded here. We're going to send you off someplace. So my first experience of flying was boarding a a C-54. That's that big 4-engine transport plane. So they put a bunch of us on that transport plane and took us to Craig Air Force Base in Selma, Alabama. So we got down there and they completed the training, which was really very simple. It was the marching bit, nothing tough. So from there, after we got through the basic training, we became a private first class. We got that one stripe on our arm, you know. So I was fortunate enough to get into, and I must have someplace in my enlisted, my paperwork, it must have indicated that I was a mechanic, because I was a mechanic at the time. I was working at a filling station as a mechanic, blah, blah, blah. So I got assigned to a maintenance squadron, 616 if I remember right. And that was the P-51 squadron. Oh, I loved it. So anyway, we get in the barracks and then we start going down to the flight line. And they teach us how to refuel the airplane and how to put oil in it and all the pre-flight stuff. Make sure everything is moving in the right direction, you know, the ailerons and elevators and all this and that. So we learned about airplanes down there. So we had 70 of those P-51s. And I'm going to show you a picture of a P-51. That is one of the most famous airplanes to come out of World War II. That's the P-51. It has a Packard-built Rolls-Royce engine in it that put out 1,500 horsepower. This airplane was capable of at a dive speed of 505 miles an hour. So cruise speeds were probably right around 250 to 300 miles an hour. But that became my favorite airplane. And I worked on that little airplane. Well, it's coming up summertime now, you know, so I worked all that summer. And going into 1952, of course, now we're talking January 1951 is when I went in. So in 1952, I had almost a year's experience on that airplane. And so anyway, the reason I went overseas, no good deed goes unpunished, right? So we had an air show in 1952, in the spring of 1952. And we took all these airplanes, at least a whole bunch of them, and lined them up on the other side of the ramp. And I mean, at the wingtip had to be exactly 31 inches or whatever it measured out, and the propellers had to be in the, I mean, it was a display, really. So anyway, we're having this air show. I get up in the morning, and the first thing you do when you get up in the morning, you walk past the bulletin board and you read the bulletin board. So they had the name of all the people that were going to be in the parade. They were going to have a parade that day also. Well, my name was not on that list of people. So come lunchtime, I walk across that little bridge, that little creek, or correction, it's a little lake type thing. And I went over to the mess hall, and instead of going back to the barracks, I went right back to the flight line, because after all, that's where the work is, you know. So within the next day or two, they said, Andersen, you missed the parade. How come you missed the parade? I said, my name was not on the list. When I went, when I checked the bulletin board, my name was not on it. Well, you didn't come back at lunchtime. It was on there at lunchtime. And I said, oh my God. Okay. So now I'm in trouble. I said, well, what are you going to do? Well, you have to go down to the flight line and get a bucket of yellow paint and start painting the chocks. So I said, okay, so I did that. So anyway, I had a little time to think about it now. And maybe a week or two, an opportunity came up. My classification was 43, which meant fighter aircraft. 131 meant that I was a basic. So I was a 43, 131. So anyway, pretty soon, on the bulletin board says, we need a 43, 131 to go over to the Far East. I said, let me out of here.
Yeah.
Let me out of here. You shit on me once, you won't do it twice, you know.
Right.
So, anyway, I come home and had my 30-day furlough. And I jumped on a Super Connie and went to California. And am I getting ahead of something that you might want to know? Or
Yeah, keep going.
Are we okay? So, so anyway, here I am out in California. And we have to remember back in 1951, 52, in the early 50s, they did not transport you from country to country on aircraft like they do nowadays. And even later in Vietnam, when they went overseas, they jumped on a great big military aircraft and away they went. So anyway, we got out there, and I got out to California, and they processed the paperwork and so on and so forth, what had to be done. And then we, from where I was stationed in California, down to the departure, where you jumped on the troop ship, it was a ride on a ferry type, down a river, down to the San Francisco departure area, the docks, you know. And from there, up the gang plant, we got onto the air, onto the troop ship. So that was a whole new experience there. I think going over to Japan, I probably spent about maybe 9 or 10 days on the high seas getting there. And of course, going across the equator, we had the little ritual that they do when you cross the equator. So next thing you know, I'm unloading over in Yokohama, Japan, and it's just coming up dusk. And they said, everybody grab a duffel bag. Don't make any difference who it is. We're going to a distribution center, and you can sort them out when you get there. I said, okay. So then they take us down to a train station, and we're riding on this Japanese train, going through the residential areas and so on and so forth. And we got all these little Japanese kids there holding the American flags up as we go by, you know. So, and by the time we get out to Tachikawa, was the distribution point, we get out to this Tachikawa, and I don't remember now how we slept overnight, whether we had cots or what. But then the next day we all started sorting out, finding our own duffel bags and so on and so forth. And so they said, well, this group of people, and they named everybody off, will be going to Korea. This group of people will be distributed here or will be stationed here in Japan. And your tour of duty here in Japan is 2.5 years. So I'm going to be in Japan for 2.5 years. So anyway, we get over there and they cautioned us. They said, now you guys don't get too comfortable or you keep riding home and let your parents know what's going on so they don't know worrying about you, you know. So we did that, and of course now I have the selection. We got the 40th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, which has got the P-51s, and we got the 41st, which has got the jets. This was a transition period. We're going into the jets. So they said, which outfit do you want to belong to? And I said, well, I want to go in that P-51 outfit. Okay, there's where you go. So anyway, when they're interviewing me for the P-51, they said, well, something, something, something. I said, well, I don't know what you do over here, but if a starter went bad, in the States, we replaced the starter. We didn't repair it. And he said, well, we don't either, so okay, good. So here again, now I'm going over there and I've got a year's experience on a P-51. So it was easy, you know. And getting back to this, this right here, this is my particular airplane. Now, this probably was not given to me as my airplane immediately, but whoever was the crew chief on this airplane before I got there, he probably departed and come back to the States. So I got assigned to this airplane. This was my airplane. And you can't read it because it's too small, but right down there it says crew chief, H. Andersen. So I'm pretty proud of this little airplane, you know. So anyway, I spent another year, till now I have 2 years experience on this airplane. And if you'll notice, this is perforated steel planking, PSP they call it. And over Japan, the runways were concrete, but the parking areas were perforated steel planking underneath them. So this particular picture was taken when the 40th Fighter Interceptor Squadron was. As it indicates, the Interceptor, there was a war going on over in Korea just a few miles west of us across that little pond, the Sea of Japan or whatever it is. So our job was to intercept anybody that was not identifiable coming into Japan these people were scrambled off and away they go. So I made a comment to somebody one time and they kind of misinterpreted it. But this airplane is ready to go. In the mornings, probably just prior to sunrise, we go down to the air flight line and we get in this little airplane and we are allowed to start up the engine. We bring up the oil pressure and the coolant pressures and I'll make sure everything's running just fine with the engine. And we run it up to 2,300 RPM. And at 2,300 RPM, we exercise the prop. That means to change the pitch on the prop. And we pull that through about 3 times. So then, after the engine we've said, okay, the engine's nothing wrong with the airplane. We'll tow it down to the alert pad. So we tow it down to the alert pad and get it all ready to go. The officers are in a little building here and they've already been out to the airplane and they put their parachutes in there. And so all they have to do, and a lot of this was probably not actual threats, but it was an exercise. The alarm bell would go off, the pilots would run to the airplane, and we would run to the airplane. We would be pulling chocks, and we'd be standing on the wing, helping them get their shoulder harnesses on and all that kind of stuff. And they gave us 3 minutes between the time that bell went off. They wanted those airplanes in the air within 3 minutes, which was no really big problem because the engines have been warmed up. Pilots are ready, we're ready. So anyway, away they go, and whether they intercept somebody or not, at least it was an exercise that they would have intercepted somebody coming in. So that's about the P-51 story. So after about a year on this airplane, we're transitioning into the F-80. This is America's first operational jet aircraft. It's manufactured by Lockheed, and it has a centrifugal flow engine in it. It was only about 5,000 pounds of thrust. Back in those days, that wasn't too. It was sufficient. That's about as good an engine that they had at the time. So anyway, we learned how to maintain this airplane. I think they sent us over to Tachikawa to about a 2-week school, and we learned the systems and what we had to do. And as far as military aircraft is concerned, if something doesn't work, you replace it. So you don't really have to fix anything, but you have to know how it works. So we're in a transition period between propellers and jets. We only had this jet probably maybe less than a year, because I spent a year on this. Probably less than a year on this. But anyway, I got what they call Tokyo Yokohama asthma. The Japanese people burned charcoal for heating, cooking, everything was charcoal, and the air was just full of charcoal. So I got a case of asthma that sent me to the hospital. So I'm in the hospital, the doctor says to me, he says, we could put you on a ship. You get 100 miles out to sea and you're going to be just fine. I said, oh, good. But I went back to the barracks, and then now they're asking for volunteers to go down to Nagoya as a detachment on this airplane. So I said, well, I'm getting out of the Tokyo Yokohama area. I'm getting out of this asthma area. So I said, that's me. Get me out of here. So I went down to Nagoya, and that's probably about 200-300 miles south. And we operated, or we had these airplanes when we got down there. But while I was down there, now let's see, I think probably I had pretty close to about a year's service left to do over there. And they transitioned to the F-86. So I missed the transition school on this because I was down in Nagoya at the time. And so anyway, I never got to be a crew chief on this airplane, but I got to work on them and refuel them and check the oil levels and all these things you do with them. So I spent the rest of my time in Japan working down in Nagoya on this particular airplane. This is Korean War fame too. This is a North American built this airplane, and it was the first swept wing airplane in the Air Force. And it outmaneuvered and outperformed the MiG-15s. It was really the super airplane. So anyway, these are just pictures of P-51. These pictures here of these airplanes flying, when they took us from Johnson Air Force Base up by Tokyo, when they took us from there down to Nagoya, they put us on a C-47. And these guys came up and flew formation with us, so I was taking pictures out of the window of that airplane. Here we are. This says Kamaki. Well, Kamaki was the little air base right outside of Nagoya. And this is all of our airplanes. It's inclement weather, and you'll see the tarps over the canopies and all that. So they're ready to go, ready for the alert bell to ring. So as winter's coming on, there's Korean War vintage airplanes. This is the F-94. This is the night fighter type version of this. So, and in the background you'll see a C-54 sitting there. Yeah. This is where we stayed when we were not in our barracks, because we got to spend the night in our barracks. But mornings we had to come down to these tents, and they've got wooden frames underneath, and they got pot stoves in them, so we could crank up and get a little heat going in those. So anyway, it's the same thing. When the alert bell goes off, you got to get your airplane airborne. So we came running out of these tents, running to the airplane, and to get it airborne. Now you'll see this Jeep sitting here. When we got into the jets, they didn't have power enough to start their engines off of batteries. So inside this Jeep was a generator. So you backed it up, plugged it into there. Okay, now when you're going to start this airplane up, you start this Jeep, get that generator going, and supply the power to start the engine on there. So anyway, that's about there.